there is an argument to be made. Now the argument which is actually put forward goes like this, and I want Phil to tell me whether he agrees with this argument. Similarities are due to common descent. Hey look, similarities exist, therefore we have evidence of human chimp ancestry, or therefore we have evidence of homology being true. Do you agree with this argument?
No, of course not.
You don't?
No one in evolutionary biology thinks that. Right?
Okay.
It's just ridiculous.
So you don't believe it's a fact then?
No, I believe human chimp common ancestry is a fact, but it's not a fact just because humans and chimps are similar. No one is saying.
That's fine.
Right? No one is saying because they're similar, therefore they have a common ancestor.
Sure. So the argument.
In fact, if you listen to what I said, we're actually looking at the dissimilarities as well as the similarities.
Sure.
There are subtle patterns between similarities and dissimilarities. So if you take nano-P8 is not in the chimp genome, right? We don't, right? So we're not just talking about similarities. We're talking about the dissimilarities as well. But there are consequences of the similarities and the dissimilarities. The way you assess this is the theory makes a number of precise predictions and then using very parsimonious assumptions.
Yep.
Then, again and again, if you keep finding that the predictions are found by the evidence, then you say the theory is true. Okay. Now,
wait.
Hang on. Let me just. I want to address what you said.
Sure. But I asked a particular question, which is, I summarized what you said there in an argument. I want you to tell me whether this argument is correct or it's incorrect.
Okay. If I understood what you said correct, then maybe I misunderstood you. But as I understood,
do you want me to repeat the argument?
No.
Okay, sure.
Well, I would say what I understood you to be saying. You were saying that it was based on an assumption of homology, yeah, and that's false. That's not true at all. Okay.
Okay.
Let me tell you.
So human chimp ancestry is not based on homology.
It's not based on an assumption of homology.
It's not based on the assumption of homology.
Correct.
Okay. So
it's based off of evidence.
Sure. So tell me this.
We don't start with the assumption of homology and then conclude homology. Of course not.
Okay.
Right.
So here's the thing. When you go out in the world and you look for a genetic similarity between humans and chimps, or an anatomical similarity, or a similarity,
or dissimilarity, we're talking
whatever. What are you basically looking for?
Okay, we're looking for evidence of common descent.
Based on
the predictions that theory makes.
And what's the predictions?
Okay, I just gave some predictions.
Sure.
Right.
Which is homology.
Okay. No. Homology is the conclusion. It's not.
No. Homology is an assumption.
Okay. No, it isn't. Okay. Let me just explain to you why it isn't. Okay.
Sure.
Right. Okay. Because we have some traits that are similar because of homology. Right. We also have some traits that are not due to homology.
Fine.
This is convergent evolution. Yeah, homoplasia is the cladistic term, but a more general term would be convergent evolution.
But there's a difference between these two terms.
Okay. But the point is the same, right?
No, it's not.
How is it different?
Okay. So when you have convergent evolution, you are assuming that common ancestry is actually true. Right?
Well, okay, I mean, yes.
So, when it comes to the initial point which I made, which is that you begin off with an assumption, and that assumption is an assumption of homology, and then you look for similarities or dissimilarities. You're saying homology is a conclusion. I'm saying homology is an assumption. Now, I'll give you evidence why it is actually an assumption and not a conclusion. Erasmus Darwin, Darwin's grandfather, he believed human chimp ancestry. He believed in it, okay? Yeah. Now, what was his evidence for human chimp ancestry?
I wouldn't have thought he had any evidence for human chimp ancestry. I didn't know Erasmus said that. Maybe he did, I don't know.
Okay.
I wouldn't have thought
Erasmus
he had much evidence. Okay, fine.
Now, going back to the Enlightenment, and many of the thinkers of the Enlightenment, just like Erasmus, they believed in human chimp ancestry to be true as well. And this goes all the way back approximately 3,000 years to the ancient Indian philosophers in the Indus Valley. All of these people, including the Greeks, the early Greeks as well, they believed in human chimp ancestry as well, human primate ancestry. This was based on the assumption of homology. Now what Darwin did is he came along and he put fuel on the fire by giving them a mechanism by which you can have transformation. So homology is an assumption, and for that assumption, for human chimp ancestry, for it to be taken as true, you need to have an argument. The best argument that you've given me so far, I've summarized, and you need to tell me whether you disagree with the premises or whether you disagree the premises leading to the conclusion. So let me repeat it for the benefit. One last thing. Let me repeat it for the benefit of the crowd here. Similarities are due to common ancestry. That's an assumption. Hey, look, similarities exist, whether it's a pseudogene, whether it's something in genetics, whether it's something in linguistics or whatever. Therefore, common ancestry is true. I want you to tell me, do you disagree with the premises or the conclusion?
Okay, what I would say is I disagree with your premises. Okay, you don't start. I mean, there may have been people that thought. Hang on, let me finish.
Sure.
You spoke and
sorry.
Interrupt you. Okay, right. So it's certainly true. There are people that thought human-chimp common ancestry were true before we have the evidence. That's true. Okay, but when you go and do the genetic tests, right? When you do the genetic tests, you don't know what the answer is. The genetic tests give you an answer though. Okay, so you can go in there, experiment. You can do that experiment without any presupposition about whether human and chimps have a common ancestor or whether they don't. So if you take the example that I gave, notice that Sabboor did not really counter any of the evidence that I actually presented. Hang on, please don't interrupt, right? Okay? I said if evolution is true, then we should find that nano P8 is the youngest of all the nano pseudogenes.
Which is homology.
Okay? But homology doesn't tell you which of those nanogenes are the youngest, does it?
Yeah, but you're using homology.
But it doesn't tell you which are the youngest. It doesn't tell you a date.
Look,
does it?
Phil, you're making an argument which is that genetics has given us something new.
It's not me giving the argument. This is what all of the people on the Chimpanzee Genome Consortium said. Okay? Don't make this about me, right?
But this is your interpretation of what they're saying.
Okay. Well, it's damn clear what they say.
So Phil, tell me this.
Spectacularly confirmed.
Sure. So
that's what they said.
Okay. That's not what they said.
Now, this is what they said.
Okay, one sec.
I'm sorry. I'll pull it back up just so you tell me what you read that out. Hang on. Read that out where it says more than a century ago.
What paper is this?
This is, I told you, initial sequence of the chimpanzee genome and comparison with.
And
the
what is that?
Genome.
What is that? Comparison, which is homology.
Yeah, but you're comparing to see whether homology is true or not. And the data could come back couldn't it?
Yeah, but hang on a second.
Is it true or false that the data could come back and say not homology?
You put the cart before the horse. Let me explain let me just explain what's going on here. When you go out and look in the world, there's no such thing as looking at scientific evidence, observations, and then coming up with a hypothesis. That doesn't exist.
What?
You don't go out in the world, look for observations, and come up with a scientific hypothesis.
Really?
No. What you do is you start off with a hypothesis and then you go out and look for evidence.
It goes both ways, but that's
okay. One second. So
give you an example.
Darwin himself, what he basically said is this. He said if science doesn't proceed by beginning off with a hypothesis and then looking for evidence, then you might as well go to a quarry and count pebbles. Now this issue is a well understood problem in the philosophy of science, that you have the theory ladenness of observation because of this issue. Now, when you are doing a study like this and you say we've come to a conclusion, that conclusion starts off with an assumption, as it does in the title of the paper, which is the assumption of homology, comparison. One last thing.
The paper at all. That's false.
Comparison.
But they're comparing. So
comparing what? What are they comparing? Me and the tree, or they're comparing humans and chimps?
Humans and chimps.
Which is homology.
No.
That's not homology?
No, it isn't. Because homology is, okay, let's explain to those people that aren't familiar, right? Homology is defined, the definition of homology has changed over time, okay? So before it was just similarity, okay? Now we think it's similarity due to common descent. That's how the homology is generally understood.
That's not quite true.
Let me finish, right? Okay? But this is the important point. The important
Every
point,
point's important.
No, because some are trivial, right? Some less trivial, okay? Right, so the point is, there's nothing in the title of the paper that says anything about homology.
What?
Okay?
Read the title again.
Initial sequence of the chimpanzee genome and comparison with
Comparison of genomes is homology.
Okay, no, but it's not.
Because you're comparing to...
Why. If they're homologous, then we look to see, take the example I gave, we look to see if they're homologous, then nano P8 should be the youngest of the pseudogenes.
Yep.
We don't know that ahead of time.
Yep.
We do molecular clock data,
Yep.
and then we see, is it homologous or is it not homologous?
Yep.
Okay? It's not decided ahead of time.
Yeah,
Now,
but the
of
assumption
course-
is there though.
Okay, yes, the assumption is there. I don't
Yeah,
disagree with
yeah,
that.
and that
The
assumption,
is there.
so you
But-
previously said it's a conclusion or an assumption.
No, I'm saying, what I'm saying is, you're misconstruing what I'm saying.
No?
What I'm saying is that you don't just derive homology from an assumption of homology. What I said was,
That doesn't make any sense though.
what I said is that you derive common ancestry from the evidence, not from the assumption of common ancestry.
Okay, so
Okay, I'm not saying no one ever assumed
okay,
there was
sure.
common
So
ancestry.
let,
Obviously they did.
let's delve down to
Right.
genetics.
Okay.
Do you think genetics gives evidence for human chimpanzee history to be true literally?
Well, it depends what you mean by true, literally.
Forget that. Do you think it's evidence?
Yes, of course.
Apart
it
from
is.
homology.
It's spectacularly.
Okay,
it's
so
strong
tell me
evidence.
this. Is that anything apart from homology? Is genetics, has it taught us anything apart from homology?
Well, of course, genetics taught us lots of things.
In terms of human chimpanzee history?
In terms of human chimp ancestry, what it's taught us is that humans and chimps share a common ancestor.
No, that's actually
Right.
incorrect. Let me give you evidence for that.
No, it's not.
Let me give you evidence for that.
That is exactly what
No,
all of the people in the
no,
field
we're not-
say, and that's what the evidence
No,
points to.
that's not actually true. Let me give you.
is true.
Let me give you evidence.
Okay.
This is the same problem that Aaron Ra came up with,
Okay,
right?
go on.
He thought genetics was something different to homology, right? Like it brought something new in. But you have to put it this way: a scientist walks into a lab.
Yeah.
He walks in with a certain assumptions, and one of the assumptions is that of homology. That is a given assumption before you even enter the lab, right? Now that assumption does not change because of something you observe. It is still an assumption.
Yeah, but you can invalidate the assumption via observations. If NanoPA was not the youngest of the pseudogenes, right, that would be evidence against the assumption of common ancestry,
Okay,
would it not?
no.
Do you agree or disagree?
Let me
Answer that. Do you agree or disagree?
What day of the week is it? Yes or no? Let me break down your question. Let me break down your
A very
question.
serious question. If it turned out that NanoPA was not the youngest of the pseudogenes, if it was 100 million years old, that would be very strong evidence against human common ancestry,
There is
would it not?
no, it wouldn't.
Why not?
I'll tell you why.
All right, tell me.
Because homology, the idea that humans they did not come in the history of the world by themselves de novo. They are linked to something else, primates or whatever. This is a basic assumption in science, and there is no piece of evidence that can go against that.
How is that? How would that be? How would that not be evidence against it? You haven't
No.
explained anything. You've just stated.
No, but let me explain why.
Okay, go ahead.
And this is linked to my previous point, which I was about to make about genetics. So science begins off with methodological naturalism, which is the idea that anything that we look at, we are going to assume there is a natural explanation for it. So when you look at me and you, a blade of grass or Lady Gaga, they're going to assume we're going to have a naturalistic explanation for this. Correct? Do you agree with me so far?
I think the answer to that's complicated. So you carry on.
Okay, but I'm going to make a blanket statement. You can challenge it afterwards, which is
Okay, go on.
that is the very crux of the scientific method, methodological naturalism. So, methodological naturalism means that anything a scientist or evolutionary biologist studies, they're going to assume that there has a natural explanation. Because of that, human beings and chimpanzees, or human beings or something, if chimpanzees or primates didn't exist, right? If something else existed, which was, I don't know, whatever, pigs, whatever, right? We would always be linked to something which is non-human, simply because of that assumption of methodological naturalism. So there is no piece of evidence which can go against that foundational assumption of science.
Okay,
Now let me,
totally disagree.
okay, fine, that's fine. Let me make one more point, which is this. You're saying genetics has added something new, which is exactly what Aaron Ra was saying, which is why I'm disagreeing with both of you at the moment. Genetics, all it tells you is that you have this particular field, just like all the rest of the fields, in which you have an assumption of homology. That's all you actually have. Now, let me give you some evidence for this. Jonathan Marks, he's an atheist evolutionary biologist, and you can check this out yourself. He believes human chimpanzee history is true. He is an atheist. So for him, foundationally, human beings have to be linked to something else in life. Yet he, in his book, which is published by Oxford University, called Evolutionary Anthropology: A New Introduction, right, an alternative introduction, he says about homology. He says, what has genetics actually taught us from the time of Linnaeus, which is prior Darwin, in terms of genetics? He says absolutely nothing. It can give us new information, but it doesn't change the foundational assumption of homology. Homology is an assumption, and genetics doesn't make it into a conclusion. It is still an assumption, and it will remain an assumption whether you bring out your evidence from genetics or anatomy or biochemistry or the fossil record or linguistics.
Okay. So let me respond. I think what Sabboor is saying is completely and utterly false. We don't have to assume on naturalism that humans are related to chimps, and I'll explain why. Because there was a popular belief, goes back to the ancient Greeks, I think it was Anaxagoras that came up with it, and it was only disproved, actually same year I think as the origin, I think it was 1859, right, called spontaneous creation. Aristotle believed in this, okay, and it was popular up until the 19th century, where it was considered that species spontaneously were created, you know, out of non-living matter. Right, so on that, now that can be a perfectly naturalistic scenario. Okay, you don't have to believe in God to believe in separate creation. You could have a naturalistic separate creation for all the different species. Okay, so there's nothing at all about naturalism that forces you into a conclusion that humans and chimps have to be related. They don't have to be related.
Okay, what?
Now, let me finish.
Sure.
They don't have to be related based off of naturalism. Okay. So naturalism doesn't force you into that conclusion.
Sure.
But what forces you into the conclusion is the evidence. Okay. That evidence. Now notice that Sabboor has not really said any specific problem with the evidence other than a general criticism that's based off of naturalism. But as we've seen,
no, I said naturalism and then homology.
Okay, but again, you don't have to assume from the outset. You can do a test. The test will tell you. You could say, I start off with the assumption humans and chimps are not related, and then I will look at. You could do that.
Okay,
right?
so tell me.
You don't have to.
Okay,
assume
so tell me this.
In fact, just to show you how wrong you are. When the first people started looking for hominid fossils, right, they didn't necessarily assume it was with chimps. Okay, some people thought that the orangutan was the closest.
Which is,
right? And so now, of course, I accepted that would be a naturalistic form.
And that's homology too.
But my point is, the evidence can check whatever your assumption you start with, right? The evidence can then update what you start with, right? So the evidence could contradict your belief that humans and chimps share a common ancestry.
Okay, sure. You made 2-3 points. I need to address them now.
Okay.
So you admit that it does start off with an assumption.
Okay, what I'm saying
previously
is,
you didn't do that.
No, okay. What I'm saying is, you don't have to start with any assumption.
That's fine, but you just admitted right now that you do start with an assumption of homology.
Okay. When you say you, what do you mean by you?
As an evolutionary biologist or a naturalist or somebody that's looking at this, you start off with the assumption of homology.
Okay. If you're an evolutionary biologist, then you will believe in homology.
Fantastic.
However,
and would you start off with it? Would you start off with it?
If you start, it depends what you mean, right?
Okay.
Let me finish. Let me answer that point. You don't have to start off with this. If you're an evolutionary biologist, you don't have to start with the assumption that humans and chimps share a most recent common ancestor.
Okay.
Would you agree with that?
No, I don't.
You don't agree?
No, I don't agree with that. Because the first. Okay, you made 2-3 points.
And also, as a naturalist, you don't have to even believe in evolution.
Okay, but you've said 2-3 points which are unrelated, so I need to dissect each one at a point. Okay, so firstly, when you said, as a scientist, you don't need to start off with methodological naturalism, that's... Okay.
No, I didn't say that. What I said was, if you believe in naturalism, you don't have to believe in evolution. You could believe in spontaneous creation.
That's not a point I made, though. That's a red herring.
It is, because what you said was that if you're a naturalist, if you start with methodological naturalism, you have to believe that we have some kind of common ancestry with other animals. That's what you said, and that statement is false.
Because you're making a few points, I'm going to have to take notes.
That's fine.
Sorry, yeah, go on.
Okay, so my point was, you said that as long as you're a naturalist, you have to believe that we share common ancestry with other animals. That you have to believe that.
Yeah.
Right? And that's false.
You have to believe in some naturalistic beginning of a human being. Right?
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be with common ancestry with other apes, does it?
Yeah,
but it doesn't have to have common ancestry with chimps.
Yeah, but that's the most popular view.
Because the evidence directed us that way. It wasn't always the most
prefer to write my hand. Okay, so two points here. So, what would you say about somebody who says that all you need is all you need in terms of evidence, all you need in terms of a beginning is just the first sort of spark, the first sort of luck, and from that you can explain a purely naturalistic story of all human beings basically having a common ancestor, right? What do you think of that idea?
Well, you'd need to back each idea needs to be backed up with evidence.
Sure.
Right?
Okay, now.
And in terms of human-chimp common ancestry, we have overwhelming evidence for that. We have multiple independent lines of evidence. And
that's all based on the assumption of homology. That's the point I'm making.
No, that's the whole point. You say it's based off the assumption of homology, and that is just completely and utterly false.
Okay.
Right? Now, that's not to say that people don't have assumptions of homology, but the evidence, the tests, they are not based off an assumption of homology. They are independent of what you start off with your assumptions. You could assume, if you went into that lab
Can I have your glasses for a second?
that human and chimps were not sharing common ancestors.
Can I have your glasses for a second?
Can you have my what?
Glasses. I'm going to demonstrate a point.
Okay.
Okay. Do you mind if I wear them? Okay. So let me just wear your glasses for a second. I want you to tell me something, right?
Yeah.
So I'm wearing your glasses right now.
Yeah.
Since I'm wearing your glasses, am I affected by the lens?
Yeah, I would have thought so.
And wherever I go, is this lens going to be all-encompassing in terms of what I see?
That's what it was.
Well, it depends what you mean by see. If you mean visually, because people use seeing as perception, right?
Yeah.
It just
which is what it is.
No, but hearing is perception. You know, there's a touch is perception. So in terms of your visual outlook, of course, it's going through the lens. Yes, of course.
Okay, fine.
Yeah.
Good. Now, as a scientist, the point which I'm making is, whatever field you look at, whether you are a biochemist, a geneticist, an anatomist, linguist, evolutionary psychologist, you have the assumption of methodological naturalism and the assumption of homology. And that assumption is not something you can put aside and look at the evidence independently, because that's not the way that science works. That's the point I was making.
Okay, can I respond? Right. Okay, so you can. The whole point is you can test your assumptions, right? You can collect data and see if your assumptions are correct or incorrect. So again, if you look at the genetic data and you say, okay, if evolution is true, nano P8 must be the youngest of all the pseudogenes. Now that data comes back to you.
Okay,
gives you an answer, and it doesn't depend on what you started with.
Okay, fine.
You'll have to explain how it is. Is it just coincidence that nano P8 is the youngest gene? Tell me why. Why, if evolution is not true,
sure.
Why is it? Why is it that we share the same mistakes in the same location, and then with the one that we don't have happens to be dated before the split, just like evolution would predict? Tell me how that happens.
Let's do some counterfactuals, so you understand my point.
Okay.
If they make an assumption that something is going to be there and it is there, or if something's going to be there and it's not there, it doesn't make a difference to the assumption of homology, and it doesn't make a difference to the overall epistemic weighing of human-chimp ancestry. That's the point I was making. I'll give you some evidence for this.
Okay,
so, we and chimps are supposed to have a recent common ancestor. So, why is it that if somebody was to use the assumption of homology and then go ahead, why is it that the closest to us in human behavior is not actually the chimpanzee, is actually the ant? Ants have warfare, ants have economics, ants have actually battles. Hang on one sec. Sociologically, according to evolutionary biologists, the closest thing to human beings is actually the ant. And there's a book on this, E.O. Wilson's The Social Conquest of the Earth, right? And there's other atheist evolutionary biologists who've admitted the closest to the human being in terms of our social capabilities is the ant. The closest to human beings in terms of our intellectual capabilities is actually the crow, right? Now, those observations which go against the sort of a priori sort of, before looking at the evidence, if someone was to assume if homology is true, then this would be true. Those haven't changed at all, the epistemic weighing of human chimpanzee history, those dissimilarities. Why haven't they? Because the assumption that you begin with is always going to remain an assumption, and the similarities that you see, you're going to say are due to common ancestry. The dissimilarities you're going to say are due to homoplasy. There is no piece of evidence that can undermine that.
Okay, all right. So first off, the statement that humans and ants are the most similar.
Sociologically.
All you said was that because they have. Let me just see. What was the evidence for that? They have warfare.
Okay, let me give you some.
So one at a time. One at a time. One that was warfare, correct?
Okay,
correct.
But I gave you.
Also have warfare. So that seems like pretty weak.
Okay.
What was the next one?
Okay, one second. So let me explain how sociology works. I think you've made a misrepresentation here. Of course, they both have warfare.
Right.
Except in ant colonies, and this isn't according to me, this is according to the evolutionary biologists who study this. In ant colonies, you have massive warfare where millions of ants go out and they fight. And not only do they go out and fight, you actually have ants which go out and apply medicine to the ants which are actually injured. Now, the complex level of warfare that ants have is totally different to human, to chimp warfare. Now, when it comes to human and chimp being similar in terms of the sociological behavior, and humans and ants actually being closer than humans and chimps, this is not something I've said. This is something evolutionary biologists have come to the conclusion of. And of course, those conclusions can be revised based on new data, but that's the conclusion that they've actually come to. Now, Henry Guy, he's a atheist evolutionary biologist.
He's not an atheist, you're wrong.
He is an atheist.
No, he isn't. I got a quote from you directly.
Okay.
You're wrong.
He is an atheist evolutionary biologist. He's based here. Okay, we can deal with whether he's an atheist or not later. Okay. Let's deal with his point here. His point here is this.
Yeah.
In his book, An Accidental Species, talking about us, he writes in that book that humans and ants are the closest sociologically, and he's the senior